Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 292 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. It is our first recording of the year. I'm not going to say Happy New Year because I think we're already on the 18th of January, which is a little bit late. But hello, listeners. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the year with Marcus Wormuth, all about switching jobs remotely. And today we have another piece about, working in virtual teams, but also specifically leading a virtual team. And today's episode is What's Going On meets Rethinking Thinking Remote. So what we're doing in these kind of episodes, we are taking some stuff that's going on at the moment and then revisiting some of the content that we put out into the world. I think it was 2017 in the form of a book, which were actually a collection of blog posts. So the blog posts or the chapters that we refer to in this episode are also available as open blog posts, or you can find them in our little book called Thinking Remote, available in all booksellers in audio. I was going to say video, but not video. Audio.
Not yet.
Not yet. Ebook and paperback. And the other voice that you can hear at the moment is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. And if it's not Happy New Year, then I hope it's a happy year so far, at least.
Yes, at least a happy year, a happy month, please, please, please. And listeners, my name is Pilar Orti. If we haven't met before, lovely to, I was going to say see you, but lovely that you are here, allowing us into our ears. Now, today we're going to talk about this concept of working out loud, which is a concept that's been around for years. We don't have anything to do with its inception. It's something that wasn't particularly specific to remote teams, obviously. But we're going to talk about how that it can be. Well, let me just go back a bit. But if we look at the two articles we're looking at, one of them is called The Dangers of Working Out Loud. And the other one is called Now That I'm Remote, Can Everyone See How Hard I'm Working? I think that I've just realized I've got the links here, but not the titles. So you can see it's all about it's about the point of view around working out loud from the manager and also from the other team members as well. And this was also instigated by an article that we came across recently, which was an article about Matt Mullenweg. So it wasn't an article about remote teams, but it was profiling the CEO of Automatic, Matt Mullenweg. And it had a little note about working out loud without mentioning working out loud. So this is what sparked it off, and thought, this concept, we need to revitalize it, don't you think, Maya?
Yes, I think so, because the context has changed so much, certainly since we were writing about it 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, so amongst other things, because so many people have had to adopt remote work without even thinking about, okay, how are we going to, it's not just about communicating, is how are we going to keep this feeling of team, of togetherness? How are we going to stay aligned? How are we going to stay connected? How are we going to stay creative? Because one of the things we saw a lot of, Maya, was, yes, everyone has stayed productive while working at home during a pandemic, but the creativity seemed to be waning. And so I think that a lot of what's behind this working out loud concept is that aspect of creativity.
Yes, definitely. And for different people, different creative styles, that creative energy comes from different sources. Some people are extremely comfortable just shutting themselves down and generating things from their own heads, but others really thrive on that kind of interactive energy with other people. So if you decide you're going to work from home for whatever reason, and you do risk losing that, then it has to be replaced somehow or other.
So I think we could even title this episode Working Out Loud for Productivity, Creativity and Collaboration. Because I think,
I like that.
that could be, I'm just writing it down just in case.
Yeah, hang on to
yes,
that.
Yes. So let's just very quickly recap. So this concept of working out loud, is really about that. It's about sharing aspects of your work, mainly online. This started when the internet became something that everyone could get hold of. And it's really about that. It's about sharing aspects of your work that are useful to yourself or to others. So it's useful when we're sharing, and it's also useful for other people. And we did do an episode around a wonderful article called Working Out Loud Does Not Mean Being Noisy, which Lilich, what I forgot his first name, but one
Jochen Lilly?
Yes. I can't believe this. It really, my brain. I'm reaching 50 this year, and I think that's it with my brain. So it's a wonderful article, and actually from it, we took the direct framework, which I use all the time in training and any kind of conversation around working out loud. And it's wonderful. People love it. So, but that really was about, when we say working out loud, it's not about just talking and saying stuff. It's about being very intentional about it.
Mm.
And then one other point around this is that once we started talking about this, I personally thought that I didn't like the name because it's got this loud thing in it, which always seems like you're just putting stuff there. And so that morphed into the concept of visible teamwork, which I like because that has a focus. Working out loud has been used a lot outside of teams, so by people in HR, learning and development, just people online who are working out loud, nothing to do with teamwork. But in our context, I think visible teamwork just gives it that focus.
Yeah, I think something's just occurred to me. So this is exploring a completely half-formed thought, but there's something about being loud is coming from the person expressing what they're doing, and visibility is like listening. It's for the person perceiving it. So there's something also about flipping that round, that you have the context of what other people are doing available to you if you want it. It's not about them having to broadcast it at you.
And I think that
it's sort of inverting it.
Yeah, sorry if I interrupted. I think that I'm getting choppy sound from my end. But I think that's really important as well, because that is what a lot of people don't like when you first introduce them to this concept of telling others, because it reminds them too much of like Facebook, where I talk about everything, or broadcasting, as you say. Whereas making something visible, like you say, is different to pushing it. It's almost like we're just opening a part of ourselves for others to come into rather than pushing it out onto them.
Yeah. So I think that's probably quite an important inversion that we need to think about, how that changes the qualitative experience for both parties.
Yeah. So if we were rethinking thinking remote, if we were rewriting the book, we could, well, I don't know, you would probably need to add a chapter rather than change everything. But I think that even that terminology has evolved as the internet and as more people have introduced online practices, I think. So the first, I was going to say episode, but the first chapter of the book we're looking at is the dangers of working out loud. And that, actually, no, let's go back a bit, because I think it's worth exploring how things have changed since we wrote those blog posts. We've already talked about some of this, but I think that what I've noticed that's definitely changed since 2017, I think it was, or actually this first article is August 2016. One thing that's changed is that everyone's adapted the apps that we associate with visible teamwork and working out loud. They've adapted the apps, but not the concepts. And so what I found, for example, working through a different consultancy for another client, is that I was invited into Microsoft Teams, and I thought, oh, great. I don't have to send emails, and I can see what other people ask about this. And guess who's the only one posting messages?
And they're still emailing each other.
I don't know where they're having the conversations. It's just used as a file repository. So actually that Teams should have been a OneDrive. It should have been a shared folder. So that is one thing I've noticed.
And yeah, there's so much functionality out there, but as you say, it's the practice that hasn't kept up with it. And a lot of the app design has really improved. I mean, since we wrote those articles, I think it's much easier now to decide that you're going to use Teams in a certain way or Slack in a certain way. And you can really make things visible that weren't before in a very subtle way through status and ready lights and things like that. But unless you have the conversation that that's how you're going to use it, then you won't change, and you'll probably still email each other about what you're doing, which rather defeats the purpose.
Yeah, and the other thing, the apps have improved, and also the documentation and the information around the apps has also grown a lot. So, but I don't think many people have had the inclination, or maybe the time, or the energy, or the screen time to go, for example, into the blog of an application and see what they talk about and how they use it. Because there's so much great information around at the moment about how and why to use the apps, but nobody seems to have the time.
Yes, even, there are some great case studies out there. If you look at how other organizations, if an app contacts a user and says, we like the way you're using your product and we want to profile you, that makes such usable content that you can really, if they've taken the time to dig into what their users are doing, you can probably learn so much from that. But yeah, you do have to actually go and read it.
Yeah. Or as you said, have the conversation in the team. But yeah, or both. Oh my God.
Yes. Well, hopefully what other people are doing can inspire a conversation about what you're doing internally, the bits you could do, because not everything's going to be applicable to you. But even if you spend, I don't know, half an hour reading through blogs and you get one nugget, the productivity transformation in your team is just going to be so beneficial exponentially that I think it's probably time well spent.
And the thing is that, and this was the whole reason for going into helping teams work online from the beginning, is that the conversation really should not be about the tech. It needs to be about how we're working together. So if we focus it from that point, then we're more likely to want to have the conversation. We're more likely to be engaged in the conversation rather than thinking, oh, how are we going to use Teams? It's, okay, how are we going to stay up to date with the conversations we're having? Or how are we going to make sure we keep learning informally from each other? And I think that we just need to, like always, we just need to be asking the right questions to take us to the right conversation rather than how are we going to use Teams? Well, that's not very exciting, really, let's face it.
No, and actually the user experience of getting on the app for the first time and onboarding has become so good now because they've become so ubiquitous, for apps that may have been pretty much the province of people in quite technical and development orientated kind of organizations have now had to serve the whole world. So they've had to really adapt. I got onboarded into a new client Slack team recently. It was the first time I'd been new in a Slack team for a long time. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is, even if someone had never turned a computer on before, the way it just walks you through about 5 different things. It says, here's where you talk to people and here's your profile. And it was just, and it took about a minute and a half. And I thought that is so good. But actually, it almost, by removing all that friction, you can think that's all there is. If the whole team just goes through that, then you can just jump into a world of noise in Slack and never really figure out anything strategic about how you're going to communicate with each other.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. The other thing that I think hasn't changed is that the aspect of how we communicate online, especially asynchronously, although of course we can work out loud in real time, but we're mainly looking at doing this asynchronously. It's still mainly writer focused, I think. And even though we start to have the technology and, like you're saying, all these apps are starting to change and to introduce new features, but we still tend to think that if we are leaving something online for someone to look at later, especially if it's about communicating around our work, it's mainly writing. Is this something, I mean, have you seen much change around the practice of this?
No, I really haven't. And it's interesting reading that Matt Vollenweg interview that clearly that's still how they're doing it too, even though they pioneered this whole thing. It's still, and when you look at the occasional sort of hiring document for automatic and things like that, it's very much oriented about being able to express yourself extremely clearly in the written word. And of course, you need to be extremely clear when you're going to have that writing used asynchronously, and people can't say, hang on, what did you mean by that, and so on. But we do have technology available to us now to express ourselves using different dimensions to writing. And I do feel it disadvantages people because not everyone can write. I'm very glad not everyone can write, or I wouldn't have a career. But if people don't express themselves clearly in writing, they could just as easily share an audio clip or a Loom video or something else that might make their content or their message less ambiguous for when they're not there to be cross-examined about it. And sometimes in async, you do need a little bit more than the written word.
And I was writing this morning about this, that one of the barriers to asynchronous communication is thinking that we have to write well as that. And what I mean by that is that their punctuation needs to be right, the spelling needs to be right. And although we do need some of that for sense, I think that we can probably bring our bar down within the team and for this kind of stuff. But I think that is
definitely
still
it's the message getting through is what matters. It's funny, I can remember that from maybe 10 years ago, hiring people to work and it being a barrier to synchronous communication in probably an early iteration of Slack. Actually, there were people who struggled in the team because when there was a conversation going in real time, you could see them replying really slowly and deleting and correcting their spelling and things like that, and having to work with people to say, no, this is a conversation. It actually doesn't matter about your punctuation. Just bash it out. If you don't know what you mean, someone will tell you. But I think that's still a barrier. I don't know, even after all these years of Facebook or other social media, when you look and think, really, you write like that? People still have hang-ups about it in a professional context. And whilst, it's a shame that people aren't taught to write or even to type better in school, people do need to get over it and just feel free to express as well. Otherwise, you're not going to move the conversation on sometimes.
And that's something, and if we start looking at it from the team leader's point of view, or anyone who's trying to instigate this kind of change, that's also something worth making explicit. We've never had to say that before, because the norm has always been we write as best as we can, is that, hang on, when we're doing this particular thing here, this working out loud or whatever, we don't need to. Or if it does become a problem, let's be free to say it as well.
Just it's one of those things that can be in your communications agreement or protocol or whatever you call it. Look, if you're emailing a client, please make sure you use your spell check and punctuate correctly. But if we're arguing something in the water cooler, then just crush it out through your fingers however it comes out and don't worry about correcting it. Be really, really explicit about that. Yeah,
and you mentioned you referred back to the article on Matt Mullenweg, which I thought is a good time now then to read the few lines from it that prompted some of this. So I'll just read out loud, and it's talking about... I just read. So for new companies, joining Automatic can feel a bit like being dropped into Mullenweg's frontal cortex. So sorry, let me go back because it does need a bit of context that Automatic has been acquiring a few companies recently, like Tumblr and Pocket Casts, and they're just being integrated into their system. And I think there's 1,900 people now in Automatic, fully distributed all around the world. So they are the pinnacle of remote work, but they are very, like Maya was saying, focused on the written word for async. So for these new companies, joining Automatic can feel a bit like being dropped into Mullenweg's frontal cortex. It's a completely remote company, for one thing, and because Mullenweg is a blogger at heart, you're likely to spend most of your first few days at the company reading. Automatic, like Mullenweg, defaults to transparency and flat hierarchies. Employees are encouraged to write about their ideas even in their very earliest stages, and everyone around the company is encouraged to comment. That meant, for instance, that Pocket Cast's Ivanovic could read back through chat logs to see the conversation that led to its acquisition, including the part where some employees thought it was a bad idea. It can feel strange at first, but multiple founders I spoke with said they quickly came to appreciate the Automatic way of doing things. And isn't that like the best advert for working out loud in this case?
Absolutely. And it's a very clear insight into their radical transparency as well, that everything is there. You can read back and see it would I suppose in terms of an individual, it would be like reading back to see the notes about your interview for being hired or something. It's very unusual to have that degree of transparency. And I think the other thing, that because of the background of the founder in the structure of open source software, I imagine that there must be loads of clarity and navigation about what on earth to read in those first few days. Because if you've got over 1,000 people expressing everything in writing and then commenting on it for everybody else, you could just drown. I imagine they've got excellent documentation and guidance as to, this is what you need to immerse in, these are the things you need to stay on top of, this is the stuff for interest over here in another part of the company that doesn't really affect you, and so on. It sounds like everything's accessible for those who want it, but that doesn't work unless there's quite clear structure and navigation too.
Yeah, the intentionality, the structure and the discipline is very important. And we're not suggesting that all teams go that way. I mean, this sounds very, very heavily documented, etc. And of course, it's really following the founder's way of doing things. But you can pull it back and take from it, okay, what do we take from it? We take the onboarding aspect, that onboarding is not just about all the practical stuff, but it's also about how people express themselves, how people think here, how people share ideas, etc. And that can all be seen if you've got some way of working out loud. I have to say, though, that the fact that it's there forever could make some people nervous. It would make me nervous.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have done it. Now, where did I do it? I have done it thinking, oh, if I write this and this person joins us, will they see what I've written? So it can also mean that we hold back sometimes. But I think we've got to, again, that's a conversation we need to have. And the other thing is that not everyone has to work in this way. Of course, your team spaces can be private to your team, and you are safe knowing that, unless one person joins you, but actually no one else will see it. Or you could decide, well, how do we work with this? Is some stuff just for in the moment? Or you could even have things that you delete. I don't know.
Yes, or that expire over time or something. I think there are some conversations you literally can't have in such a transparent way, which might be legal or to do with compensation, or that there are all sorts of things that couldn't happen in quite that way. But I think what this does is it really expresses the culture of the company. And it also, for anybody still worrying about whether you can effectively disseminate culture in a completely remote team, this is one definite way to do it. I think describing that experience of literally being like dropped into his brain in order to immerse yourself at first, and the way the founder's vision is able to remain so pervasive and such a core part of the onboarding. You can't do that in a company with 1,000 people with face-to-face conversations, because the founder would never get to do anything else. But because of their focus on documentation and expressing themselves in written word, you can do that asynchronously. So whoever joins in whatever country can have that quite intimate experience of really immersing in how the founder thinks. And that's something a lot of organizations could probably learn from, even if they don't want to go the full radical transparency route.
So it's also worth remembering for people who are new to the concept of both working out loud in teams or visible teamwork, is that there's this whole spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, we have probably some of these more high-level thoughts, conversations that can be strategic even, etc., that could take the shape of long pieces of text or long audios, who knows, or long videos, right to the other end where it's the basic, this is what I did today, or this is the progress on this task. And then if you're thinking apps, you have all the way from task-based apps like Trello, Planner, or through things like I done this as well, or things like OneNote or just shared notebooks where you can just write stuff down quickly, or even spreadsheets, and all the way through things a bit more complicated, things like Slack or Microsoft Teams where you can have conversations, things like Google Docs or Microsoft Word Online where you can have comments. This is for those large organizations using Office. Honestly, you don't need to be emailing backwards and forwards ideas and corrections about documents or plans. I have to say that I succumb to clients when they're doing this, because for speed, I just go, you know what, I'll do it here. show you how it's done. If you don't buy it, I'm out. I'll just carry on.
Yeah. Oh, God, it's the bane of the freelance writer. And you send them a Google Doc and they download it and version this and, oh, God.
But that requires a mind shift. This is the biggest mind shift that I had, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, working with people who were using Google Suite already. Yeah, we already use it. Yeah, you did. But you didn't use it to not just check your work in a Google Doc, but also talk about it, communicate about it.
Use it to collaborate. That's what it's built for.
Yeah, and connect through it. And also, you've only used Google Docs to create documents that then have a life outside. You can also use them to have conversations in the team. So it's real mind shift of what the technology allows us to do, and from the human point of view as well. So, this is this is a huge topic, and I think this is at the heart of what online collaboration can be now. So, going then back to the articles that we wrote all that time ago, I'm just going to start with an excerpt from this one on the dangers of working out loud, because it starts to highlight one of the difficulties. One of the things you were saying, Maya, was suddenly there's a lot of stuff out there. And this is a problem for every team member and also for the manager. So I'll just read from it. So this was August 2016. When we begin to work in a virtual or partly remote fashion, one of our fears is that our communication with team members will be sparse, that we won't know what everyone is working on, that we will lose the human connection. The solution that myself and other virtual experts offer is to narrate your work, to work out loud. And so we go into our collaboration platforms every day. This is where it's dated, be it Yammer, Slack, Basecamp, they survived, Trello, Skype for Business, Red Booth, and any others that might pop up in the next few years. Well, at least that's covered. So we go into our collaboration platforms every day and have visible conversations with team members so that we don't fear losing all the bits of information we would overhear in the office. We hyper-communicate for fear of under-communicating and to make sure we don't lose that sense of team all the time. And that includes you, the manager. Now you can see the conversations people have about a task. You can read every small request for information or help. You can watch people struggle through their process, a struggle that is essential to them as they figure out how to innovate. And all the while, because we're trying to move away from the dysfunctional hierarchical structures we all love to hate, you are trying not to interfere. You are reminding yourself that team members like autonomy, that you don't have all the answers, that you're just creating the environment within which they can thrive. And yet. And this is such a challenge, because everything is there, and it actually requires so much discipline for the person who is used to being the one that maybe saves the day, is problem solving all the time, always being there for the team members. And suddenly,
that manager who walked around, kind of looking around at what was going on and felt in control, and people felt comforted by that presence.
Yeah, and you can't help but want to help. Actually, this is the issue. So I think that's an added thing, and sometimes there's some stress caused for the person in charge and the person who really feels like they need to be in charge more than they need to. That causes a stress, and then that might be, well, you know what, let's not do this anymore. Let's revert back to X, Y, and Z. Or actually, I don't want to come in and see all this. Therefore, I'm not going to share. Therefore, I'm not doing any working out loud. Therefore, if the person in charge is not role modeling, at some point, people think, actually, is this worth it?
Yeah, and again, if you've never explicitly talked about what you share and why and how, people will just pick their own comfort level, really, and tend to default towards that, tugging against whatever else is going on in the team. And it's probably never going to work very well.
Yeah, but it's great. I think also, like when I've talked to some managers, they've said, yeah, but all this stuff that I'm doing, it's not really of interest to them for whatever reason, because they might be very functional or whatever. Well, it's not just about talking about what you did. The working out loud can also extend to the thinking out loud. So your team members might not want to do your everyday thing, but I'm sure they'll be interested in knowing about some of the conversations you've had with other people in the organization, about some of the thinking that's leading you to make some decisions, and even just what you think about what you're working on, because you're also human manager.
Definitely. And, you know, this is your team that you're growing and developing. The feedback you get from them can not only inform what you do in the moment and how that thinking is shaped and developed, but it's part of a professional development as well. And, you know, identifying who's taking an interest in the future directions of the organization. And these are the things that might affect them. If it's changes or new clients or new projects and so on, I think it's a very valuable signal to the manager, especially remotely, who's ripe for more, who might be overwhelmed in what they're doing because they can't take an interest in something outside of that, and so on. So these conversations serve a wider purpose, and they're part of the essential toolkit of the remote team leader.
And of course, then we have, we're already talking about how this affects team members and just the practice also of working out loud. So Maya, a year later, you wrote, so October 2017, you wrote, "Now that I'm remote, can anyone see how hard I'm working?" And interesting that the URL is virtualnotdistant.com/blog/presenteeism in remote teams. And can you just remind us what the essence of this article and chapter of Thinking Remote was about?
This was really about teams who feel insecure with one another about their visibility, and maybe because they don't have the established practices and protocols of working out loud, or of visible teamwork, or making their workflow visible to each other, who feel that they have a need to show off how productive they are or how present they are. And I've seen this happen in teams that have become dysfunctional. And sometimes there's a healthy sense of competition in remote teams, and that's great, particularly if they're working in an environment where it pays to nurture that kind of feeling, like a sales team and so on. But when you get people almost boasting of their all-nighters or checking out documents or sending emails at really weird times to show how hard they're working, that clearly reflects an insecurity about how their work is being perceived and valued. And some of that might be able to be corrected by improving working out loud or visible teamwork practices so that there's more evidence of their productivity and their workflow. But it probably needs to be addressed culturally as well, that it signifies that people are feeling undervalued in some way.
And it's so difficult because I'm going back to the manager side as well. You can use, so sometimes managers are worried because they can't see the work that's being done, and because actually sometimes they are worried about underperformance, but of course they don't feel that they have the data or we don't know what's going on. And I often say, well, set up some visible teamwork thing, because at least you can see, and also people start to be more accountable. However, we don't want any working out loud or visible teamwork practices to turn into that, to turn into micromanaging tools.
And it can, it's the way some of these productivity more oriented apps are designed, or even the name like the cringy "I done this." It's almost like, well, what have you done?
I thought this.
Yes, exactly. And it's always, if you had a day just thinking, then what do you write when you get your prompt from "I done this"? Or if you spent your day, head down in a single project, but somebody else has actually posted 10 different things that they've done during the day, and obviously not writers anyway. So it's, I think we have to be, that there are lots of great tools and they fulfill lots of different functions within the team, but we have to be careful if it's kind of promoting the right behaviors that we want, and there might be a better way of making our work visible to one another rather than having to check things off a list or account for ourselves at the end of a day, where it might feel that you haven't made measurable progress on something because what you've been doing is very unstructured, but actually you've been working really hard. You shouldn't feel a need to defend that.
And I think that as well as the conversation we have when we start to adopt these practices, I think the conversation around what's happening and what we're noticing as we're using them is also quite interesting. So we can have a conversation around, okay, we've been using this for a month. We've been using this practice for a month. We've been reporting what we're doing. How do people feel about that? And I know this is a very difficult conversation. Sometimes teams do not feel safe to have that, but you can also have that in your one-to-ones if you're managing, and it can give you, again, and it can be a tool in another sense to lead you into a conversation about something that is got to do about either the work or how we're feeling working with each other.
Yeah. It does require quite a lot of psychological safety to say in a team, I don't like being held to account in this way. But as you say, there are other ways of doing it, either one-to-one, or there are apps that are for larger organizations where you can do feedback like that quite anonymously.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm always aware that us in this podcast, other advocates of remote work, consultants, trainers, and also managers, we're really interested in the mechanics of teamwork. But actually, some team members are like, you know what, I don't care about any of that. I'll just do that and I'll get on with my work.
Just do my job. And the rest of the team are just there, and that's I share a manager with them, but that's it.
And I think we really need to be mindful of that as well and really understand why we're introducing a practice, what it's going to do. And sometimes it could be that you're the manager, you're feeling that disconnection, everyone else is fine, but you're not. And I think that's also valid a lot of the time to say, can we try this because it's going to help me show up in a better way to help you or to help coordinate. And, you are also a team member. So I think that that's also worth looking at.
Yeah, and we probably shouldn't overlook the impact of the technology itself in terms of this presenteeism idea. And obviously that really wasn't such a thing when, 2017? God.
Yeah.
We've been working together a long time, Pilar. But I remember at the start of the pandemic when search volumes spiked for sort of employee monitoring software and things like that. And it reflected this massive insecurity on behalf of the managers of, I can't trust people to work where I can't see them. And this is the kind of mirror of that, of people feeling that maybe they can't trust me to work, so I have to show them that I'm busy on something where actually the trust might be there. Maybe you need to test it and prove it. And then I remember reading blog articles in 2020 about people sort of staying logged into Slack on their phone while they went for their exercise or something so that they could keep their green dot on. And that's the kind of people using the technology to fake presenteeism when they're not there, or kids in their Zoom classrooms who changed their username to connecting ... so the teacher would never ask them anything.
I haven't heard that before.
Just watch what the kids are doing. That's how we can learn the best way to do it. Or kids putting in a little looping GIF of themselves so they could go off on the PlayStation or something during a long, boring lesson. So there are various ways that the arms race has escalated on both sides, but this is, if you see it as a conflict about, you're supposed to be, I own your time during this period, then there's always going to be people pushing back against that. But it may be if we move to trusting people and actually evaluating them on their results, then everybody will be a lot happier.
But that's the whole point of working out loud, is that we remove the need to be visible as people doing the work right now, and we put the focus on what we're doing or how we're doing it or why we're doing it and all that stuff. So actually it can help us to use the technology more mindfully in that way. But okay, let's wrap this up because I mean it just shows this is so huge. It's not just a question of, let's take one app and, put some messages up and that's it. It psychologically, it is really interesting, which is why we love it. But that means also that a lot of thought has to go into it. Maya, before we move to the community news, anything else you want to say about this?
No, I think it's just really interesting to look back on those articles from 4 or 5 years ago and see how much has changed and how little has changed.
Which reminds me, thank you for that I will be sticking the chapters of the audio files of both chapters, but not with this because this is already going to be a long episode, but I'll drop them in at some point after we've released this episode. So listeners, if you want to read the articles, we'll put, Maya will put the links in the show notes to both articles. They're open as blog posts online. And also at some point, we'll put the audio chapters so that you can listen to them. But for now, let's go and share some community news. So there's not too much going on at the moment, but I think it's all very exciting. So I had something on my Twitter feed that I wanted to share, and that is Annette Bramley, who she's quite engaged in some of the content that I share. Sorry, I just lost the link to her tweet. She tweeted, this might be of interest to some listeners. She endorsed the podcast, the 21st Century Work Life, and she said, can heartily recommend this podcast. I quote from it in our ebook at IOP Publishing. And this is a book. I think it's also, I don't know if you can buy it or you need to be part of that platform to download it. But basically, the book is a research collaboration, a step-by-step guide to success. So it's really about collaborating for research, if I understand correctly. So some of the chapters are the what and why of research collaboration, get ready, preparing yourself to collaborate, leading by example, preparing your team to collaborate. And I think I have to ask her, unless she's listening now and can reply, which would be great, is what do they quote? I'm so excited. So that's great. So that is a book by Annette Bramley and Liz Ogilvy. And Annette's Annette, getting lost in my Trello. Annette's Twitter handle is tak. Oh, app is going funny. Yeah, at Annette B_N8 if you want to follow her. Isn't that exciting, Maya?
Yes, it is. It is very exciting to know we've been quoted. We don't know what they've said.
I hope it was good. No, I'm sure it was. I think it's really, really nice. I feel very honored that's happened. The other thing I wanted to congratulate Carlos and Elsa who were on this podcast in December. I think it was talking about Pueblos Remotos, which is an initiative where they bring remote workers into a part of the Canary Islands to work alongside and be alongside some local entrepreneurs. And I think from some of the stuff I've seen, I haven't talked to them directly. I think the latest one in Fuerteventura went really well. And if you speak Spanish or if you don't mind using Google Translate, I came across an article from one of the participants who has shared the process, what they learned and everything. And it just gives you a really good sense, like really detailed of the kind of entrepreneurs they came across with, the kind of interactions they had with it. So I just thought it'd be interesting to share that with listeners as well. It's on the pueblosremotos.com blog. You were very inspired by that episode, weren't you, Maya?
Yeah, I think this time of year I always want to run away to the Canaries anyway. It just seems such a lovely example of the difference remote work can make in remote communities. There's two different meanings of the word.
Yes.
Kind of colliding in such a creative way. So, yeah. I'll get there one day.
And I really like the fact, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, that they're not trying to do anything and change anything with the remote work, but they're actually they're actually giving more visibility to the people in those remote communities through that and just bringing stuff. I think it's wonderful. And then...
Yeah, and they're saying you can learn from each other. You know, it's not about the remote people coming in and saving communities. It's like, come and listen to the beekeepers and the cheesemakers.
Or the people in remote communities having to adopt remote work. No, this is very location-specific work they're doing. That's great. And so on the back of that, my husband shared an article with me from the English El País, and it's called, just in case you're interested, this is not turning into a Spain podcast, The Spanish Villages with the Best 5G and Fiber Connections. So that's interesting to have a look at. I'm just trying to see. It talks about 5G, Yeah.
I'm in Spain's third biggest city and we still don't have 5G. So it's
Oh,
funny that some little villages have got it.
yeah. This is the ranking of small towns with the best 5G connections. Hoz de Jaca in Huesca, Navatejares in Ávila, Río de Cerdaña in Lleida, Pradena de Rincón in Madrid, San Miguel de Aguayo, Cantabria, Sojuela in La Rioja, Peraleda de San Román in Cáceres, Arrieta, Vizcaya, Ciruelos, Toledo, and Monteagudo in Navarra. Which means if you like, especially the north of the peninsula, you've got some options. You don't need to go to the Canary Islands.
True. Yes, you can go and hang out in wine country.
Excellent. So yes, we'll stick the link to that. And then I wanted also just a shout out to an episode of My Pocket Psych, which is an episode I co-host with Dr. Richard McKinnon, and he's the lead host. And we did I think it was a wonderful episode on personality. And basically, I think the tagline was something personality, don't fence me in, which is really about all the personality surveys we do, not surveys, the personality questionnaires and what are they called? The personality like Myers-Briggs and stuff like that.
Well, quizzes or,
well,
I suppose tests,
the
really,
tests.
if you want. Some of them are more valid as scientific tests than others. But but not test is a better word than the quizzes you find in Cosmopolitan.
No, it's the personality tests that are sometimes used in recruitment and that are often used for development and sometimes for fun or just to develop common language. And that the conversation is really about that. It's about things to look out for, and making sure that we don't either fence in ourselves because we've seen that we have this trait is quite high, therefore we are always going to behave like that, or actually stereotype other people because they have that trait. So it's episode 103, and I tweeted about this episode and just said, I put the example that, all introverts must like remote work, or you like remote work because you're an introvert. I think it's probably the one that I've heard more. ILMA, sorry, I'll come back to her name in a second. I've got the quote here. Somebody replied, when we interviewed people in our company, we found out that extroverts prefer remote work. They have no problems finding ways to communicate, even asynchronously, and their social circle outside work is bigger. And I just thought that's such a spin-off on the fact that lots of people want to come back to the office because they're extroverts. And suddenly, no, it's much more nuanced than that.
Absolutely. And it all comes back, I think, to this thing that when we work remotely, we experience our colleagues through the online medium and it filters them. And it's so easy to not see the whole person and to think that people are like us in ways that we take for granted. And they maybe not. And, people can fulfill their social needs the way they want to in their own communities and through their own lives and choice of activities and companions and be extremely extroverted. And it's the danger of assuming that people are like you. It's like the whole integrators and separators spectrum. You might be doing the same work in the same apps, but you could be completely different and meet your needs psychologically in lots of different ways.
So do check out, if this is something that interests you, do check out episode 103 of My Pocket Psych. And the lady who tweeted that wonderful thing was, she's called Ilma, and she tweets at Ilma_tweets, and she's the CEO of Remote Company that unites MailerLite, MailerSend. Oh, that's interesting because I use MailerLite for my adventures in podcasting, little side business, little plug there. Excellent. Maya, I think have we got any more community news?
No, I think community is still getting back online, getting powered up after a well-deserved break. Excellent. So it's going to be an exciting year in remote work, and we're looking forward to bringing you lots more news as it all unfolds.
Excellent. So on the back of that, if you have any articles that you would like to share with us and other listeners, then please, you can email me directly, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, or you can go on to virtualnotdistant.com and use the contact form there. While you're there, you can sign up to our monthly newsletter, which has listening and reading recommendations. And if you have any book recommendations, please send them through because I'm finding it really hard. But it's also got a digest of our own content. And you can also download a free guide on leading through visible teamwork, which is all about asynchronous communication. You can follow our page on LinkedIn. Our Twitter account is Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. And of course, you can subscribe to this show, 21st Century Work Life, in whatever podcast app you prefer if you are listening to us on the web for now. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Maya.
Thanks, Pilar. Bye, everyone.
A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.